So it's super easy. I'm just using some different materials. The beauty of fly tying and the stuff that we have now is we've got all these great new materials that are coming out, which can make your life easier, but also can kind of spruce some of your flies up. So I'm gonna tie this exact fly first, and it uses, you can kind of tell there's no bucktail in here. There's a dubbing material in here that I know they carry at the shop called Magnum dubbing. I'm going to show you a technique that I'm going to use with that so you can kind of build a little bit of shape to it. Um, there's some flash in here too, and the flash is just a filler. There's a multitude of different ways you can put filler flash in here, sparkle brushes, ice dubbing, things of that nature. See, there's a question there. I just got to click on that. Oh, there we are. Sweet. So, and the tail's a rabbit strip. So we all know one of the biggest things, especially with saltwater flies, is, you know, there's a lot of really cool flies out there, and people tie up these great concoctions and put them on the internet. And then when they go to fish and they're like, you know, why is this thing foul, etc. If you don't build some sort of like spine through these style of flies, they'll have a tendency to foul, especially with rabbit. There's a piece of mono here that's basically punctured. If you can kind of see it here, it's punctured this rabbit strip, and it goes right through, but it's got a stopper on it. There's kind of like a knot built up at the end, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. It's not tied. We're going to kind of burn that a little bit, and that just keeps that tail staying in place, and it'll still kind of swim. The hook I have in the vise right now is an SC15. It's a 2.0, one of these guys right here, but there's a litany of different hooks you can use. Some of the new blue water hooks from Airex are fantastic. You know, you can use Trocars, SP600s, TMCs, whatever the heck they are. And then if you guys aren't going to be fishing in the salt with these, you know, this is kind of an overkill hook. I fish a little bit of everything. So, you know, B10S works really good. Yeah, Drew, you could definitely use Ripple Ice Fiber, whatever kind of flash you like. I have a tendency to use a brush in there sometimes, but I'm going to use some shimmer fringe today. The reason I'm using this is it's really easy to work with. It's fused on one end if you've never used it, and then it's just like long ice dub fibers that are straight. But anything will work. Flashaboo, you name it. So when it comes to tying clousers, there's two kind of schools of thought. Traditionally, you start with tying on the dumbbell eye, or you could tie the dumbbell eye on later. One of two different ways to do it. I'm going to start with tying the eye on first, and then we're going to build the foul guard into this, and then we're going to tie in the rabbit strip. So what you have to remember too is if you look at a clouser, the dumbbell eye is actually tied on the top so that the fly inverts itself like this. So we have to remember the top of the hook is actually the belly, and the bottom of the hook, where the gape is actually going to be the top. So that's a huge mistake people make when they go to tie these. They put the wrong color on it, put a dumbbell eye somewhere on there, and then you know where it goes from there. So I'm going to start with some thread. I'm just going to use a 140 power thread. You could use 210. You could use mono if you want. I like this Viva stuff because it's super strong, but UTC will work, Dandel, you name it. We're just going to start right at the eye and then work our way back roughly to about a third of the hook shank. And I'm going to clip my excess off right there. Next thing I'm going to do is just take a little drop of gel Loctite, and mine's all gummed up at the moment. And I say a little drop, all you need is just that much, which is really not much there. I don't know if you guys can see it. I'll zoom in just a touch. I mean, it's literally just a little speck on there, all right? Then we're going to take your dumbbell eye, and depending on how deep or how heavy the water is that you're going to fish will dictate what size dumbbell eye you're going to use. I'm just putting a small one on here. I don't want to make this super heavy. I typically use smalls through like larges. You know, sometimes you need something that's a little bit lighter. So I'll take one wrap right around the dumbbell eye like this, and that helps me trap it and bring it down. And then I'll take 2 turns over the dumbbell eye facing this way, if you can kind of see it there. Keep it on top. And then I advance my thread in front, and then I crisscross and go the other direction just to get it started. okay? But then I'm gonna figure eight it. So I'll do one wrap around, then around the dumbbell itself, one wrap in the other direction, and then around the dumbbell itself. So it'll look kind of like this. Come over and around the dumbbell eye. Come here, come this direction, wrap it around. And then after about 6 or 7 turns, my hook is sliding here, I'm sorry. I'm gonna take 1 or 2 wraps right around the base of the eye, a little bit of tension on there to kind of lock it in place. And that's typically all you'll usually need. If that eye starts to move around on you, there's a couple different things you can do. You can put a little layer of glue over it, or what I'll typically do to kind of lock that thing in is just take some UV resin, the thinnest stuff you got. For the time being, I'm just going to touch the bottom of those thread wraps like so. Let that kind of seep in a little bit. And then hit that with a torch. Just kind of cure that and lock it in place. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go right from there to start our tail. So I'm going to start with my rabbit strip. Now, when you look at the rabbit strip here, you gotta remember this is going to be our belly here, and this is actually going to make up our tail. So traditional thought would be to tie your rabbit strip in like this, right? So that all your hair is facing up on the top of the hook. In actuality, we want to tie it in reverse, okay? So it's going to be tied in like so. So I'm just going to build a little bit of a thread base right back to the bend. I probably should have used a smaller jaw. I thought I was going to need a bigger one on this. Right back to about where the bend is on this hook. Once I've got it there, then I'm just going to tie in that rabbit strip. And the easiest way to do it is just kind of take your fingers and do a little pinch wrap right around it so it kind of envelopes the hook shank. Take a couple loose wraps to start, and a couple tighter ones to go there. Then what we're going to do to build in our foul guard here, we need some heavy mono. So there's a couple different ways that you can tie foul guards on here. And the biggest thing you're going to deal with mono, especially if it's spooled, is it's going to have some sort of a bend in it, right? Like you see here. You can boil it, you can straighten this stuff out. It's never going to really go perfectly straight. So what I try to do is work with it. I don't want to work against it, because if I work and put this piece of mono in like so, my tail's going to curl down. So if anything, what I have to do, and the easiest way to keep that piece of rabbit straight, is when you go to put this mono through it, you don't do it so tight that it's going to bunch up your tail. So I always kind of cut these a little bit long, as you'll see here. So then I take a look at this piece of mono, and the easiest way to affix this onto the top of the hook shank. Yep, you could use standard size or Magnum, either or. I have a tendency to stick with the standard size strips just because the Magnum ones have so much more hide on there, and they get waterlogged easier, and they're a little bit more difficult to pull out of the water column. But if you're totally fine with that, go for it. So what I'm going to do, back to what I was saying, is now that I have this facing in the direction that I want, I'm going to take a pair of pliers, and I'm going to flatten out this mono on the end that I'm going to tie in. That's going to give me a little bit of a better base to adhere that to the hook. So I've kind of got that in place. I want to just kind of take a look at it, make sure the curvature of that piece of mono is correct. And what you can do is, you'll see I'm going to try and push this up right up into where the eye is. So I have a nice little even space there. I don't have any gaps or bumps, etc. Now, the next thing I'm going to do after I kind of take a look at that, and I'm just going to lash this down really well so it doesn't pull out on me. I'm going to take a look at how long I want this tail to be. So if I want a fly that's going to be about, 3 or 4 inches long, I want to make sure that I leave enough space. As you can see here, on this one here, there's probably about a 1/2 inch space at the end when I curl this mono or this rabbit strip down, just so that it stays and it swims a little bit off the tail. So I'm going to come in here and take a look at my rabbit strip. If you got a bodkin handy, we're going to use a bodkin to poke a hole through this. The easiest way to typically do that too is just heat it up with a torch or a lighter. It'll go right through there a little bit easier, because the trick is you want to make sure you pop this right through the center of that hide. Get it right on there. poke a hole through, just like you see here. Then I'm going to take that piece of mono and just thread it right through that piece of rabbit. Take a look at it there, like you see. It's like I said, it's a little bit longer because you'll understand why I do that in a moment. Now, what you got to do, this is going to take a little bit of practice, because when you go to do these, you'll have a tendency to either cut it too short or burn it back too far, and then your tail is going to be all bunched up like I told you, which we don't want to do. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this tail here. Before I do anything, if you've got a double-edged razor on your desk, this is the best way to cut rabbit hide, because if you go in with your scissors, there's a really good chance you're going to nick some of that hair, and then you're going to have this big bald space at the end. So you just take your razor, just like so, and now I've saved all that rabbit strip. You can put that aside, and I've got a nice clean cut on the hide, if you can kind of see it right there, right? Didn't cut any of the hair. Now, I take a look at my piece of mono, and I've got more than I really need, so I'm actually going to cut just a little bit of this off here. I'm going to pull this forward so it's out of the way, because this is where it can get tricky. If you get your torch a little too close to this, you're going to send that rabbit strip up in flames, and then you're going to have to start over again, which we don't want to do, right? So I roughly look at where I want that thing to start, and you can see what I mean by start. I want that rabbit strip to stay relatively straight, and I see where my little cutoff point is there, and I'm just going to pull it back, and I'm going to put my finger right about there, and I'm just going to burn this, and you'll see it's going to kind of torch itself down a little bit. You guys can kind of see that there, and it's going to give me a nice little bump and a little bit of a bead that's right on the end. So when I go right there, it stops that rabbit strip from flaring off, just like so. So I have this little mono bump there, boom, and now that tail's not going to foul, and it's going to stay right on there. Takes a little bit of time, but it's a nice little extra added step that you can do to have a nice little rabbit tail in there. We all know how rabbit swims in the water, so it's kind of a nice little touch. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to build in some flash in the underbody on this. Like I said, I'm going to use this shimmer fringe. I like it because it's fused together. So all you have to do to work with this stuff, and the thing with flash is less is more. So I'll take half of what I think I need. You can kind of come in here with your scissors like I do here, and you can kind of just separate it. So I'll cut a piece off from the fused end right about there, just like you see here. This is going to give me a little bit more than what I need. So what I'm essentially going to do is take this shimmer fringe, and I'm just going to kind of envelope it over the hook shank. And when I say envelope it, I'm just going to grab it right here, just like you see, and take my other hand and push down on it like so. Now just take a couple of turns right here, and it's going to kind of distribute that flash all the way around the hook shank. Take a couple turns over it. You can even bring it in front if you like, whatever floats your boat, but you could probably cut that off there. But if you want it to look a little neater, I suggest you do this. Advance your thread right in front of that dumbbell eye, and now you got a nice little cut, even cut there. Now you can come right in, and it's real easy to work with, and you're not dealing with all these loose ends because you got this fused piece right here. You just cut that right off. Keeps it nice and neat. Then you can start to kind of work a nice neat thread head there. Now I'm going to tie this one just like I did this one here with some of this Magnum dubbing. This is a really cool, neat product. I tie a lot with this. It's just something different. You'll get a little bit of a different action out of it from bucktail. It's just like Greg Senyo's laser dub, but it's much longer, as you can see. It's probably 2 to 3 times longer. So you can use this in a lot of different applications. So that's the chartreuse I'm going to use for the top, but I need to do my belly first here, right? So I need some pearl. What you might find you have to do with this stuff is it can kind of get kind of bunched up and balled up on you. So you just kind of card it, pull out what you need, and then line it up. The nice thing about this is there's some flash that's built into this material too. So it's not just one old solid color. So you're going to get little bits of flash throughout it. So the trick to this is you're going to tie this in the middle, And you always want to take half of what you think you need because we're going to fold this in half. So I take it right in the front, take one turn over, two turns, a third, and I'm just going to wisp this rearward like you see here and kind of tie back over the front of it because we're going to build up a little bit of a thread head. Invert it in the vise. Do the same thing. Now, be mindful when you go to sweep your fingers backwards on this side because that's the business end of the hook. You'll inevitably put your finger into it. I've got lots of holes in my thumbs from tying a lot of flies and doing the same thing. So we're going to bring our thread right back to here, right about at the base of the eye. Do a little pinch wrap here. One turn, two turns, three. Same thing, fold it rearward. Just watch that beak of your hook. And now we're just going to build a thread head on there. Kind of wrap back over it, neaten it up. Once you kind of got that in place, you can do whip finish. And then we're going to resin that. And I'm going to show you something else you can do too if you really want to have some fun with playing with this, is you brush some of this out with a little brush here. Pull some of the loose fibers out on that. And then I'm going to use a flexible UV resin on this material. You can kind of use it as like a mini weed guard. But first, I'm going to take some more of this bone dry, which is a really, really thin resin, just to cover the thread wraps to start. The brand of dubbing is called Magnum dubbing. I know the guys at the BearsDen have a bunch of it. It comes in like, I don't know, 55 different colors. You can kind of go crazy with it. And some of the color names are pretty colorful. They're kind of funny. I think one of them is called like Homeless Care Bear, Recycled Beer, which is a funny one. All right, so now we got that in place. Now I'm going to kind of pull this out of the vise. Having some issues with this jaw tonight. I don't know what's going on. So you can kind of see I've got a nice little slim profile here. This is a softer, wispier type material. So you're going to want to definitely do something else with it. Like I said, there's a couple different things I like to do. You can take some flexible resin, which is what I'm going to use here. Or if you really wanted to, you could epoxy right over this like you do with most clousers, or put some sort of a UV resin over the bottom. But if I take a little bit of flexible resin and I come right over the top of this and just kind of brush this right into the top material, which is closest to the hook point. Just take your little brush here, brush a little bit in there. And then what I can essentially do is I can control the angle of that fiber. So if I need something that's going to be a little bit broader, I take my fingers here and just pull that material up, as you see here, hit it with the torch. Hope you guys aren't getting blinded out there. And then what you'll see happens is now you've got this like semi-rigid, flexible top to this. And you can get more abrupt with it if you'd like. If you really wanted to make this weedless, you could push this up so the material covers that hook point, especially if you're fishing like smallmouth, largemouth bass and like bass ponds and things of that nature, and you're going through a lot of weeds. That flexible material on there is soft enough that if a fish grabs onto it, they're going to feel the business end of that hook and push this material down. You can do the same thing on the bottom if you'd like. And I like to kind of try and take and here I'll zoom out just a little bit. You guys can see it. See how that fly looks there? I zoom it out a little bit. I'll move my vise over. You can really manipulate this material and hold it in place so that it's not covering your eyes, as you see here. And then just take that brush, and all you need is just like any kind of a stiff bristled paintbrush to brush this on, or even a little wire brush. Hold that material back and then just kind of run it right through there, as you see here, real quick. That'll keep it out of the way of the eye. Hit it with a torch. And then the last thing I like to do, so now I've got a nice little belly on there, is we all know we need some durability in these. So now I'm going to put a thicker resin on over the thread wraps, just as you see here. You could use 5-minute epoxy, but I haven't used epoxy in years after this stuff, so that's on you guys. Use what you got. And there's the fly. And so you got this nice little, you can kind of see it's relatively straight, which is key. So if you don't work with that bend in that mono when you go to tie this, what essentially happened is if I put this in sideways, like this piece of mono, that's the direction my tail would go. So what you want to do is work with the mono that you're using. This one's kind of a little jacked up. This one's a little better here. So if I just turn this 90 degrees, now it's relatively straight, right? So that's how I want to have my tails lay. Otherwise, you're going to have this crazy crooked tail that's not going to track right, and the fly's going to do weird stuff in the water. So now I've put this back in this position. If this is how my fly is set up, as you can see, this is exactly how that piece of mono is tied in, guys. So it's in that curvature. So the curvature is going up into the fiber of the rabbit strip, like so. If I did it like this, this tail would bend down like that. Does that make sense? If that makes sense, give me a thumbs up. All right, sweet. So work with the material you have there. So that's just like I said, it's a different variation of a clouser, some softer materials in here. I like the rabbit strip in the tail. This thing will actually kind of dance and stuff in the water. Lightest mono you found to prevent fouling? You know, every mono is different. So you could probably use like 25 or 30 pound. I think a lot of it comes down to the diameter of it and how stiff it is. So I'd have to go run upstairs and find out what the diameter of this stuff is, but this is like 50 or 60 pound. This is off a giant spool that I use for fishing for, like when I'm out with Mark fishing for bluefish or we're chasing pike and stuff like that. If you dip down into definitely below 30 pound, you're going to find it's going to be a little bit more flimsy, if that makes sense. So if you don't have any 50 or 60 kicking around, but you have some 30, that'd probably work. Hopefully that answered your question. So I'll tie another one, the same thing, except this time I'll tie it with bucktail, if that works. And then we'll go from there. If you got any other questions, we'll take it from there. So I'm pretty much going to do the same thing. The chassis on this fly is going to be the same. It's going to be the same kind of rabbit strip on the back end, same kind of eyes. Should have used my regular jaw. This is too big for this hook. Oh well, it works. So just like I said before, I'm going to start with my thread. We're going to apply the thread to the first third of the hook, right about there. I'm going to take a little drop of gel, Loctite, put that right on there. Grab my dumbbell eye, as you see here. I take one wrap right around it, as you see here. That helps me position it right on the hook. Take 2 or 3 turns over it, a couple of turns and over the other direction, and then I'm just going to kind of figure eight it, getting progressively tighter as we go. After I've done a couple of rotations around that, I'm going to take that thread and I'm just going to go right around the base of those eyes, like you see here, to tighten it up. And it should be good to go. Like I said, if you have issues with it slipping, moving around, I just put a little bit of the thinnest UV resin on there, lock it in place. You go through rabbit strips, how much longer do you want to go before cutting? That's totally up to you. I usually don't let it go any longer than a 1/2 inch. So, and I'm assuming, just so hopefully I'm reading this correctly, you're talking about that last little piece that's on the end there where the mono is, correct, Chris? So there's the probably about a 1/2 to a 1/4 inch of hide left on there, if you can see it from where the mono is. I know it's kind of difficult because it's white. So the mono kind of goes through here, and then I cut and leave a little extra on there. That way it kind of helps it swim a little bit. and you've got a little bit of extra space on there. You don't want it to go right to the end per se, and you don't want it to be way too short either. Otherwise, it's going to wrap around. Hopefully that answered your question. Good. All right, so just like we did last time, so I've got my piece of mono. I kind of want it to go in that direction. I have to work with the bend as much as I can. I'm going to take my pliers and making sure that I've got it in the right position. So the curvature is going that way, upwards. I'm just going to take my pliers and just flatten out that tie-in point. Boom, I've already preset that. Put that right aside. Because the first thing we're going to do is tie in a rabbit strip. We'll advance our thread right to about the point where the bend starts. And if your rabbit, excuse me, if the rabbit hair gets a little unruly, just wet your fingers and that'll kind of get it right out of your way. So same thing, I'm going to take that hide and I'm just going to kind of pinch down and kind of envelope it right around the hook. A couple loose wraps, and then I'll take a few tighter ones, usually about a half dozen, and then advance my thread right back down to here. Leave that rabbit strip long. Now I'll take that piece of mono that I flattened out, just make sure it's good to go. This just makes it easier for you to adhere this to the hook. Same thing, a couple loose wraps. Make sure that the curvature of that's in the right direction. You don't want it off to the side, otherwise your tail is going to do all kinds of wacky stuff. And then advance your thread, going right over all that. I'm all about building durability of these things too. If you're concerned about that coming apart, you can always do, this takes what, 2 seconds, just to kind of cover those thread wraps. Put a little bit of resin on there or glue, whatever works for you. And then boom, hit it with a torch. You're good to go. Now I'm going to take a look at this one again. So I want to see about where, and the curvature in that piece of mono will actually kind of tell you exactly where you're going to want to poke that through that rabbit strip as well. You can kind of see on here, it's kind of hard to tell right from there, but you'll see it curves right through here, and that kind of shows me right about where I want that hole to go through there with the bodkin. So that really helps. So, and you want to make sure, like I said, you want to leave a little extra on there. So I take this rabbit strip, after I figure out precisely where I want to poke that hole. You can heat this up if you'd like. Look for the center of that rabbit strip. Poke a nice little hole through there. And then you're going to just thread that.
Rich, you kind of cut out on us.
Go in here. I'm going to cut the excess of this off. So like I said, leave myself about a 1/2 inch. Boom. Good to go. Save that for the next one. And now I'm not cutting and losing any of that material. Now I eyeball this. So I've got pretty good amount of mono left. Move it forward. Put my finger right about where I think that mono is going to butt up against that rabbit strip. And then I'm just going to burn this stuff down. Pull that rabbit strip out of the way so you don't torch your rabbit strip, because that would really stink. What you could also do too, I've seen this done before, you could just put a big drop of resin on the end there, shorten it up, hit it with the resin, and that works as well. And then boom, my tail's ready to go. Same thing, I'm gonna go right back in with my flash. I'm gonna use that, losing my mind here, shimmer fringe rather. And we're gonna tie in our flash for the interior of this particular fly pattern. So I'll take 1 turn over it, making sure that it's kind of enveloping both sides. 2 turns, 3 or 4, advance my thread in front. Take a couple there, and then I'm just going to clip that off so it's out of the way. If you've got any errant pieces of flash in here, there's a couple things you can do. You can either hit them with that, or if you've got a cautery tool, just cut them out of your way real quick. Now, go right over those butt ends. We'll use some bucktail here. And with a fly this size, longer bucktail is really not that important. So this is one of the shorter tails that I have. But the biggest thing with bucktail when I'm tying with this is I want to make sure the stuff is relatively soft. You can get some bucktail that's like really long and hollow, and when you go to compress it with your thread, it's going to flare on you. And we don't really want hair that's going to flare for these per se until we get to the top a little bit. So this is one, like I said, it's shorter. It's probably got hair that's like in that 3-inch range. I'm going to take roughly pencil's diameter worth of this stuff. So I've done that. Just going to comb out some of that under fur and shorter hairs that I have in there that I don't need. And I want that belly to kind of bleed right into my flash. So I take a look at it, I measure it. And then what I'm going to do is bring my thread back to here, because I'm actually going to start my belly back behind the eyes. From here, I'll take 1 wrap, 2 wraps, 3, see where it is in place. And then what I can also do is I'm going to spiral wrap over this. So that's going to help that belly go into place. You can typically use mono for this, but I like to use this white thread because the belly's on its white, so it doesn't really matter. And I advance my thread in front, take 1 turn on there, and then what I'm going to do, and this voice is driving me crazy tonight, guys, I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong jaw. I'm going to take my scissors in here, and I'm going to come in and cut this at an angle. That's going to help me tie that stuff in. Looks like I cut it short. Batting 0 here right now. It's because my hook is flying all over the place. Stand by. There we go. Improvise, right? There we go. Sorta. Disregard. We'll fix that. Should have used my other jaw. So unwrap it, bring it forward, rewrap it. Then fasten it down. Bingo. Quick turn. There we go. Sorry about that. So you don't get mad if you mess it up like I just did. You can fix it pretty fast. Just shift it forward and you're fine. All right. If you've got any errant fibers that are kicking over your eye, just clip them right out real quick. You like that, Chris? It happens, man. I tie. You can see here for this. This one's a little bit longer. I didn't have anything that was super short, but I'll make it work. You can work with length. If it's too short, it's not the case. So same thing, I'll go in there, cut out what I need, comb it out. And how everybody ties these is slightly different. I like mine to have a little bit of flare up over the top. I'll take a look there. That looks about right. I'm going to trim that off at an angle. I'm going to bring my thread right up to about where the eyes are. And just do 1 loose wrap to start, 2nd loose wrap. And then just before I go to really lash this off, I'm going to just take a look at where everything's kind of sitting in place. And then I'll go from there. If I have to kind of maneuver some of the fibers so that they're split on either side of the hook, it works. And then I'm just going to kind of wrap my thread. Relatively neat thread head right on there. Once that's in place, these damn loon bobbins squeak like crazy. You hear that? Sounds like a greasy wheel. Whip finish, clip it off, and then I'm gonna, back in the day we used epoxy on these, and I'll fix those hairs in a moment. Just gonna put a layer of bone dry on there to start, just on the thread wraps. There's a whole litany of things that you could use on that. Synthetic bucktail, you can try that. I'm not a huge fan of that material, to be quite honest with you, but you definitely could use it if you wanted to. There's a whole litany of stuff. I'm going to put a nice little thin layer of some thicker stuff on here. And this is just to build up a little bit of a more bulletproof bottom to this particular fly. So when this thing's bouncing off the bottom or hitting off a rock or the side of your boat or wherever else, it's not going to break. You can even add, if you don't like using the rabbit tails on this, you could add in like hackles and things of that nature, you know, some different things. You know, what you'll see though with this material is you'll get a little bit of a different style to it as opposed to tying with the Magnum Dub. So you've got something that's a little softer, hence we have to use some of that flexible resin on there so that you can kind of build a little body to it. The beauty with bucktail is, and I think that's why a lot of people use it, is it gives you the illusion of size and mass with very, very little material, and compresses a little bit differently. So the tail is the key to this one. This is kind of, you'll see this mono is not so stiff that it's not going to maneuver around. It's still going to kind of move in the water, which is kind of what I like. I mean, a lot of trout streamers and stuff that I fish have some sort of rabbit or other material in there. It's just another neat little way and a different technique to kind of try and add something different to your fly box. And that's pretty much it. If you guys got any other questions, we can go from there. Other than that, you can hit back and do your thing. You could definitely use craft fur. With the craft fur too, what I would probably try and do with it is, you gotta remember craft fur is much, much finer than both of these. The nice thing with this Magnum Dub is it's got a little bit of mass to it. You know, the bucktail does too, and it's a little stiffer. Craft fur, you'll need an exorbitantly larger amount of that to, you know, kind of get the same kind of effect out of this fly. What you might have to do is put some sort of a spreader under there. And what I mean by that is put another material, maybe, you know, a thin layer of bucktail underneath that, and then put the craft fur over it. Or you could use like some sort of a feather, like you could palmer a schlappen feather through there and then put the craft fur over it. And that'll give you a fly that's not going to necessarily compress. Only reason why I didn't use a mono loop on this is because of the way that this fly is tied. You know, you have to realize it's upside down. So if I've got, you could run the mono loop from the top to the bottom and start with that first. But what it has a tendency to do is I really don't like the way that the tail comes out with the way this thing is tied. If this conversely was tied this way and that rabbit strip was on the top of the hook, then I would do my mono loop in that way. In that sense, kind of like what we do on the silly rabbit fly that we tied last week. I know Mark did that for me because I couldn't make it. That one, it makes a little bit more sense because your rabbit strip is generally in the upright direction as opposed to the way it is here. We have other materials on here, so if we were to tie this in up here, it just doesn't make the fly flow the way that I like. It's not aesthetically pleasing, let's put it that way. Because now you have to tie that loop up into here and then wrap it around, and it has a better chance of making that tail not come out straight. The way that I tie it in this way with that burr on the end is to keep that tail straight, if that makes sense. Let's see, we got a flurry of questions here. Yes, same Magnum Dub as what's on the Simple Minnow, the same material. Right on. That work? You guys got any more questions, or are you good to go? Oh, here's another one. Does the burr ever pull out? Good question. It can if it's not large enough. What you can also do is you could put a large drop of UV resin or maybe some epoxy on there in hopes that that stays on there. But that's also too, if you look at this, this is made a little bit longer. And if you have this particular burr or this piece of mono is a little bit longer on there, there's a really good chance, even if the burr falls off, that that mono is still going to keep that tail on there for a little bit. But at some point, you know, all flies aren't, you know, lasting forever. That thing will completely pop off, and then you're going to have lost your whole loop on there to prevent that thing from fouling. So yes, it could actually fall off. Bunny, they use like tear mender. You can glue the two of them together. If you put something that's going to, if for adhesive on there that's going to be relatively rigid, it's going to kind of impede the amount of movement that you're going to get out of that. So I don't know how much of that you would want to glue to it, but you could experiment with it and tinker around. All right. Well, thanks for coming, guys. I appreciate it. I hope that you learned another little technique there, just a quick little one, kind of break some things up. And I'll be back here again sometime in the near future.